That was scary. But yes, so yes, thank you for joining, and welcome to the masterclass. Um, Keda Education is a kind of it's kind of a new tutoring company. We've been in business just for less than a year, and I think our mission is just to make sure that you guys know how to conquer VCE, because VCE is well, I think everyone here can agree that VC is not, not particularly easy. So we're here to help you conquer it. And yeah, so just about us and about myself. So my name's David. Um, I'm the English tutor, politics, legal studies, and economics tutor at Keda Education. Um, I'm a big fan of Kendrick Lamar. If you haven't seen, so if you guys thought that Drake won the beef, go away. Just go away. You know. No, in all seriousness, I like Drake as well. Okay. I'm a big fan of Korean food, especially Korean fried chicken. So if anyone in the call has had Korean fried chicken, you guys would know what's up. And if you guys haven't had Korean fried chicken yet, do yourself a favor and go get Korean fried chicken after the call. Along with being a huge Kendrick fan, I'm also a big, just in general, a music fan. So I collect vinyl, so the records that old people use. Um, yeah, so I collect vinyls. I'm like around 6 grand deep into collecting vinyls, so my bank account is crying because of that. But a little bit more about me academically. I graduated back in 2021. I graduated from a public school in an area that wasn't the best in socioeconomic status. I My ATAR was 92.55 and my English studies score was 43. And now I'm studying law and arts down at Deakin. And I major in my arts degree, politics and policy studies. So, if anything, our what we want to preach is that you don't have to have the best, resources around you. It's all about the individual, right? um, Kathy, who is assisting me today with running the masterclass, also graduated from a public school, and we are. I guess you can say that we're the diamonds in the rough. It's
Yeah.
about individual tenacity. It's about individual ambition in order to do well. And if you really undertake that notion and believe that, I'll guarantee you will do well in VCE. So yeah, and I've been tutoring for around since 2022, so around 4 or 5 years. No, that's my math is incorrect. 4 years, yeah. So yeah, and then Kathy's next.
Okay, so hi everyone, I'm Kathy. Um, Unlike David, I'm a Drake fan. I actually went to the Drake concert on the last night when P&D was there. It was so good. Um, I also like Acai, of course, because I'm from the north, and I also like to go to music festivals. And I'm a freshly graduate of 2024, so I just graduated last year, and I'm currently doing a Bachelor of Science at Melbourne University. I'm planning to major in psychology. Also, like as David mentioned, I went to a public, I guess disadvantaged school. But I graduated with an ATAR of 94.9. I actually got ducks on my school with that ATAR, so it just proves that like you don't need to go to a good school to do well. And I got a study score of 43 in English as well.
Yeah, Kathy was in fact my one of my students last year, and
Yeah.
I think if anything, it kind of proves that these processes that we're going to go through today not only work, but they work in spades with VCAR. So yeah, so like I said before, we're student tutors, right? We're not teachers, we're not 40 years old, we're not 50 years old that have been in the game for like years and years. We're fresh off VC, especially Kathy, right? And that gives us an advantage to help you because we have been through the game or the ringer of VCE. All our tutors at Keda are 90 plus ATARs, right? Or sorry, 90 plus ATAR graduates. So if anything, it should show you that hard work and persistence gets you the goals, gets you the ATAR that you want. I think along with that, to compound that is the fact that we have three values that we abide by. The first is innovation. I think uh, when we look at our processes, what you look at today, majority of it you probably would not have seen before in terms of the processes, the types of analysis that we do, the structure that we undertake in terms of how do we analyze a certain article. Those processes, those procedures, and that methodology has not been kind of exposed to everyone. And what we are very, very proud of is the fact that we have looked for new ways to not only improve the processes that your teachers have implemented, but to emphasize what is the crux of the marks, right? To get you the marks in your essays, in your exam. The next is empathy. Um, I reckon the biggest component to succeeding in VCE is mental health, right? Mental health is the key to success, and having that empathy, building the rapport between myself and you and Kathy or yourself, is important because not having that connection, not having that, that comfortability to kind of be vulnerable about your own marks, about your own grades, about your kind of pitfalls as an English student is important because that's how we can help you best. And the last thing is self-improvement. Self-improvement is incredibly important, right? You're here because you want to improve. You're here because you want to get that 10 out of 10, right? And you may say, well, 10 out of 10, that's really impossible. It's not, right? It's not. So yeah, and I reckon that we are, because we're students, because we're just been through VC, that we're best placed to help you as well. One thing I want to kind of preface before we start the content of the masterclass is that we teach for the exam. We don't teach for your SACs, we teach for the exam. And this is why. Now, these are my marks for my exam, right? My exam and my marks in Unit 3 and 4. So as you can see, I've got 16, 16, 20, right? And that yields so 20 being the perfect score in section C, that yields a score out of 52 or 60 if I do my math correctly, right? However, on my SACs, I scored 77, 78. This is the importance of your exams because if I did not do a 52 on the exam on 60, my SACs then wouldn't have scaled up until 89 or 91. So it's important that we emphasize the exams because it is at the end of the day, the exam is 50% of your mark, 50% of your study score. So if you do crap on your exam, I won't be surprised if the SAC marks will go down, right? But if you do well in exam, no matter how you place in your school, right? No matter how much you rank, right? Ranking is a placebo, some sort of fluff, right? It would boost your mark. I was probably I went to a school with a cohort of 300 VC English students. I was probably in the top 20 to 30 in that with my study score, with my exam, because I did so well. I placed as the second, as rank two in that. So the exam really determines everything, right? However, we also recognize that you can't just place your whole faith on exams, right? You can't just place your whole faith on one day in October where you sit a 3 hour exam, right? What we need to also look at is how do we find compromises between your school and what VCAR likes, right? And this is a balancing act between your teachers and VCAR, right? Because we need to also teach you for the exam because the exam is what matters, but also not to piss off your teachers and make sure that your teachers are also keen on your work and very excited about you as an English student. All right. So today's agenda, we're going to go through two things or two areas of study. The first area of study is creating text. So your creative piece. And the second is analyzing argument. I think these are the ones that are the most important right now because they're the ones that are coming up next, right? You already done your analytical text response. We're going to do your creative and analyzing argument. So without further ado, Kathy, would you like to? Oh well, I
Oh
still have
wait.
more to go. Yeah. Um, Creating text is it's very not confusing, but people just don't know where to start, you know? The question I get all the time is how do I begin writing a creative? And the second is how do I even write one in the first place, right? What's key is that we need to undertake these three things, right? There we go. We need to make sure that we strategize our SAC and exam so that we get the full marks. We need to explore mental texts, but the mental texts that VCAR provides are not the best ones. So what we're going to do today is we're going to provide you some other mental texts that we believe yields the best marks out of you. And preparing your draft, how your base draft is so important for you because then at the end of the day, you have to cater that base draft to your stimuli. Before Kathy starts, I just want to say that if you got any questions throughout the whole masterclass, be sure to um, be sure to put them in the chat. I'll answer them, and then Kathy will also answer them as well. So if you got any questions, don't be afraid. If you want to DM us, or you can put them in the masterclass chat, and we'll sort you out. Easy, cool. Kathy,
Yep. Okay, so first off, we're going to start with SAC and exam strategies. So on the exam, the creative needs to be your most strategic piece of writing. This is because it's basically the only section where you basically have like free will. So it's up to you on what you want to write. The only thing they give you is like the title and three stimuli, and that's most likely going to be very broad. So you can be very strategic with how you approach it. So the secret to section B is actually preparation. It's recommended that you prepare a response prior to the exam so that you do not enter the exam empty-handed. Um, your piece needs to express more than one framework. This is important so that you have more options of stimuli to choose from. It reduces the stress of you having to stick to a framework where you don't like the stimuli. For example, if you just made a piece that was on personal journey and then you get to the exam and then you see the stimuli, you don't like it and like you see like it doesn't fit with your story and then you kind of have no choice but to do it and then your story just doesn't fit. That's why we recommend that you create a piece that expresses more than one framework. Um, so you should prepare the piece and then to study for the exam, you should practice with different titles and stimuli for the different frameworks that you have chosen. And you should also practice the skill of coming up with ideas on the spot. That's really important. Um, So your pre-written piece must be adaptable or malleable. The thing is, assessors can tell whether or not you've memorized a piece because it just like seems like it's not meant to like fit the prompt. So try to make your pre-written piece adaptable and malleable in that you don't just copy it word for word on the exam. And you can also apply this for your SAC, not even just the exam. Like for example, prepare a piece that your school's framework is about, and then you can even use the same piece for both the SAC and exam because assessors don't know what you wrote for the exam. I mean, for the SAC. So your piece should revolve around the title. So this is from the 2024 VCAR English Exam report. They said that using the title is the central component in the text creation. So it doesn't matter how good your piece is, if it doesn't directly connect to the title and stimulus, you're not going to get the marks. And then your stimuli may be woven in throughout your piece in a seamless way. Don't make it forced. So like not just like one sentence. It could be like throughout the beginning, middle, and end. Like for example, if it was a quote, you could use it as a chant in a protest. And remember, you just have to choose at least one stimulus. So don't try to fit all three stimulus in your piece if it doesn't make sense. Like it's better to choose one stimulus and integrate it throughout your piece rather than like trying to fit all three stimulus in and it doesn't work. Make sure your piece has a clear and evident purpose. So, what is the key takeaway for your story? What do you want the reader to learn and consider after reading your story? Um, Preferably, you should address real world problems that are relevant in our world today, such as racism, stereotypes, human rights violations, climate change. So that's because it takes the idea of how it's actually prominent in our lives, like racism, for example, it's like very subtle. And if you write a story about how it's actually very prominent in our lives, it could kind of like bring awareness to that issue. Of course, you have to consider the elements of a story. So this is a story mountain. You've probably done one in primary school or year seven. So it's just the opening, build up, climax, resolution, and ending. And it's important that you develop your ideas throughout the text and like to make it coherent. And then the features of a creative, you should also include these features to make your story more engaging. So metaphors, imagery, short sentences to create emphasis and repetition. But you also make sure that like your story doesn't just tick these boxes because there's no template to a creative, which is a blessing, but it's also a curse because you can't emulate a story. And like writing a story, it's not something we can teach. It's like it has to come within you, like from you. And you have to kind of like come up with your own idea and perfect it. So, but it's important to include these features in your creative. And try to make your story focused. So no more than maybe three characters. Just get into it straight away. You have a word limit and a time limit, so you don't have time to build a whole world. Just focus on your purpose. So these are the frameworks: country, personal journey, play, and protest. Um, when writing your creative, try not to make an obvious story. Like for example, protest. Don't just like talk about a protest. It doesn't have to be like a big protest. Protest just means like resisting something. So it could be like resisting your mom when she doesn't let you go to that concert and like turning like making a moral out of the story. So it doesn't have to be like literally protesting. Same with play. It doesn't have to be like toys, playing with toys. It could be about what it means to play, what it means to be happy, what it means to seek solace. Um, and personal journey, that's just the journey from one destination to another. And the key word is growth. Um, for expressing more than one framework in your creative, I recommend you doing personal journey with another framework because personal journey is kind of like in every story because every story has growth. Like you have to get from one place to another in a story. So yeah, any questions?
If there are any questions, be sure to put them in chat. Um, but yeah, I think it's very important to not make a boring piece because I think you have to realize, I mean, human, VCAR assessors are human, right? They will think a piece is boring and they will mark you down. So it's your job to transcend your piece from going from a boring piece to something that is um, a little bit more interesting that you lend yourself into it, right? You create authenticity with a personal journey and maybe a personal journey that you went through. And what we'll look at right now is um, which mental text to look at in order to yield that connection to the text or yield that connection to a creative. Um, like I said before, the mental text that VCAR provides are a bit boring and they're, you know, to say it lightly, they're a bit dog poop. Yeah. Um, VCAR's mental text fails to explore more than one framework. Um, I just had a question. How would you go about making your pre-made essay adaptable for the exam or SAC on the SAC day? So basically what you need to do is perfect a base draft. So that base draft would basically you'll write it without a framework. Sorry, not without a framework, without a stimuli, right? Or without stimulus. When you write it without stimulus, it makes you put in opportunities where you can link it to an image or link it to a quote or a poem, right? So make sure that you put in opportunities where you can create the direct links to your stimuli. The next is um, the next thing to worry about when you need to make it malleable, to make it adaptive, is ensure that you know the story inside and out, right? It's not good enough just to memorize the words of a story. You need to know which points of the story can you bend in order to make it fit into a quote or fit into a poem or image, right? Now, the VCAR images or the stimuli that VCAR gives you, they're pretty broad. Like, for example, I think one of the example exams or the actual exam, personal growth, the image of a personal growth was a hill. Now, you don't have to take that image of a hill literally, right? You can do it metaphorically. A hill that is going from, that is, having the strength to go up and muster the strength in order to go up and achieve new heights. So you don't have to take things literally. And that's a good thing about English, right? Like Kathy said, it's a blessing and a curse. You have free will to interpret all these prompts in a way where it can fit your story. However, you need to do it in a way where it's not too, like the link and the chain to the connection of the stimuli from your piece is not too confusing and nothing that is too far and too distant. You need to make sure that people can see what you're doing. So yeah, cool. Um, if we go back, sorry, give me a second. I'm just trying to reshare my screen. Oh, some issues sharing my screen. Okay. All right. Cool. Do you see it? Do you guys see it? Cool. Okay. So the following mental texts are ones that I have that I've kind of chosen and I've seen that students have getting high marks with these. The first one is Barack Obama's 2004 Democratic National Convention keynote speech. Now, this was before he was president, and this was kind of the first speech that kind of made him like a famous figure in American politics. Now, what's great about this piece is the fact that it expresses three frameworks at the same time, and it was seamless. It was very seamless. So he talks about how his own personal journey was shaped by the personal journey and the patriotism, which links to country, by his parents, by his mother and father, and their grandparents, right? Talking about how he's a son of a Kenyan and a son of a white American, right? And talking about how these two journeys achieved the American dream. He does this while protesting basically a type of politics where it's very cynical, at the time, to give you a little bit more context, America just entered a war. America was, bombing countries and etc. Right? He was protesting that. He was protesting the fact that that America was divided. So what's really, really profound about Barack Obama's speech was he actually uses the speech to do to storytell, right? He doesn't just say, "Oh, America needs to do this and America needs to do that," right? He he uses repetition and imagery to drive his message home. And what's really, really interesting that he uses storytelling, right? He tells a story um about himself, how and I'm quoting him, how a skinny kid with a funny name can succeed in a country like America. And that is the most important thing to take away from this speech if you are going to look at the speech. So if you choose to look at this speech, I'll look at the repetition that he uses, right? He uses a lot of repetition, imagery to invoke empathy, and how he creates a narrative in his speech. So he doesn't, it's not an ordinary speech, it's a speech that has a story. Okay. In fact, we have a guide on this speech, a mental text guide on this speech. So feel free, just use the link. Feel free to hop on there, and you'll see what we a breakdown of the speech. And what I recommend is for you guys to fully watch the speech. The speech is 16 minutes long, but really look at the opening. Really look at the ending as well. The next is Growing Asian in Australia. So this is some students have already done this text in like year 8, year 9, but this is a very good text along with the next one, Joyful Strains, to do on something about personal journeys. These two texts are very good to invoke emotion, right? They tell an authentic story, right? They make a they incorporate a personal stake in a narrative where you want to transcend the assessor from marking work to something where they're more like it's like they kind of I'll need to read what you've written because what you've written is so emotional, so impactful that it's pretty that is really that kind of lingers in their mind. They remember your piece. Kathy actually did her exam creative on this, like based on growing up Asian in Australia, and she got great marks from it. So really, if you're looking to write an emotional story, I really would implore you to look at Growing Up Asian Australia and Joyful Strains. Now, Growing Up Asian in Australia, I know that's just really towards the Asian community, so the people that are really Asian really get the story. But Joyful Strains is a little bit more open. They talk about refugees, right? So refugees of any background, they talk about their stories and how they try to, assimilate to Australian society. If you choose these two texts as your mentor text, I really want you to look at how this follows the story mountain. The story mountain that Kathy has talked about. These stories have you know, they have a climax, they have an ending, they have an opening, they have a hook, right? So really look at the story mountain. The second is how does it impact the audience in terms of emotion, right? How it can elicit a sympathetic or empathetic um you know perception from the assessor because you do that the assessor forgets their marking work and they will score you high, right? Basically, to put it in a funny way, if you have some traumatic story, I reckon include that because they'll feel guilty and they'll give you the marks, right? But in all seriousness, it's about having a point story to talk about and a reason why to talk about. And again, it goes back to what Kathy has said about purpose, right? What is your purpose, right? Is your purpose to educate? Is your purpose to create a realization in the audience about what racism means in Australia? It is up to the purpose that really dictates what your mental text should be. The next is the newsroom. The newsroom season one, episode one, and there's a scene that the main character goes about and saying why America is not the best country in the world, and this is a monologue. So people that are doing play probably would are doing Sereno as a monologue. So anyone that's doing play and doing Sereno, I want to do a monologue, right? I wouldn't look at Sereno as the monologue because Sereno is a bit of a funny text. When I mean funny, I mean a bit crap. Uh, I don't. The purpose and function of a monologue is to reveal the actual true psychology of a character, right? To reveal how you are truly thinking about how your true feelings about a certain idea, a concept, or a person, right? So a monologue kind of is a very raw and honest um look into the character that you talk about or that the character wants to divulge, right? It captures their raw individual train of thought. Monologues are a great format to write a protest in because you don't have to incorporate characters, you don't have to incorporate a actual big protest, right? In fact, that like Kathy said, we actually don't recommend you talking about a big protest, right? But a monologue can quietly reveal a individual's kind of resistance, their kind of hesitancy, right? If they're sitting on the fence on an issue, right? And monologue is good to flesh out these ideas and thoughts. So if you're going to choose the newsroom as your mental text, right? What I really want you to look at is the contrast between dialogue and between um, the how a monologue is written. The second thing is I want you to look at the unvarnished raw nature of truth, right? How truth is so vulnerable, how truth is so, you know, um, how the truth is really about, capturing the honest approach and the integrity of the character, where your character can be maybe not, someone of integrity. But mainly your monologue has to be or should be confrontational. It should scare the audience. It should really strike, it should linger in the audience that, um, linger about the audience about how you are trying to think and the way you're kind of protesting against an issue. So yeah. So cool. All right, the next one's Soul. So this is a Pixar movie. Very good to talk about play. So I just had a question. If you're writing about something personal to a framework like play, would you have to turn it into a story? And how do you address the audience without saying who they are? Now, the audience is more so about. I'll talk about the audience first. The audience is really about who's the most likely to learn from you, right? Who's the most likely to really be receptive of your story? If your story is about, how you struggled to fit in school, then the most likely person to empathize with you is a is a student, is a fellow student, right? Or a student that is of the same, race or faith or gender as you or sexuality as you, right? The second thing is um look at who would most likely benefit from your story, right? Whose opinion are you to change, right? If you want to reveal the true colors of racism in Australia, right, look at to maybe older people. You want to tell older people how maybe their perception of Australia as this true blue Aussie kind of patriotic way of viewing Australia is not that view, right? So as a if you're running as from the perspective of a teenager student, right? You want to reveal something to them. You want to give them a little bit of hindsight how you instead of learning from the older person is actually learning from you. So very important to know your audience, right? To either they're the individuals who would most agree with you, or they're the individuals that you want them to learn something from you, right? And yes, every kind of thing, every like my recommendation is that every creative piece I would turn it into a story, right? Follow the story mountain, even if you're doing a persuasive piece. Yeah. Barack Obama did it. So if you want to look at the Barack Obama speech, I really encourage you to look at it. Okay. Cool. Just back on Soul, right? Yeah, play is typically the most difficult framework to write about because I reckon, yeah, play is pretty restrictive. Where you got country, you got protests and personal journey. They're pretty broad. Play is the opposite of broad. However, you can make it broad by making the prompts itself malleable, making the prompts itself interpreting it in a different way from other students. uh, the easiest thing that you can do with play is to make it personal, right? To link it to personal journeys. Why? Because personal journeys, like Kathy said, it's in most likely every text that you would write, right? It's the growth between a character from going from to A to B, right? So what's great about Soul is that Soul is going to the very, that question, what is the meaning of life, right? And what was found was the answer was to play. Play is the meaning of life, right? To give you a little bit of context, the movie is about a jazz teacher, a piano teacher, right, who dies. Yeah. And when they die, they go through this kind of, not kind of heaven, but more so this afterlife of like looking through everyone's different life and finding the meaning of life and whether that individual who has died wants to return back to life to, find solace in play or or continue the afterlife and let another person take his place. So yeah, so soul's very emotional. So you want to do an emotional piece, I'll also look to soul, but also how do we link play into a personal journey? So if you were to do soul as your mentor text, right? look at how soul, look at how play becomes the reason of a personal journey, right? Look at how play ignites a personal journey, right? And look at the character arcs, right? Look how a character grows, Look how the character realizes something, So it's important that we take a look at soul in order to determine how do we make play going from, you know, kids playing with dinosaurs and in the sand pit to something that is a little bit more meaningful, right? The creative has to talk, not has to, but the creative should be always about meaningful stories. Creating a meaningful story will automatically get you a higher grade than you would get than running a stereotypical story about a protest, right? I think a story about a protest, going to a protest saying that, oh, the government should do this, that's really boring. Make it meaningful. Yeah, make it meaningful. The last one, I know a bit rambling, is Black Mirror. Has anyone heard of Black Mirror? No? Okay, Black Mirror is a TV show um, by Netflix, and basically each and every episode has a new cast, new story, and in it, their main goal is to create social commentary. Yeah, to talk about society in a way that kind of not demeans them but criticize society, right? Black Mirror is, I think, one of the best texts to draw upon when you're doing play because you can talk about play in a way where it's a bit cynical, a bit pessimistic, and a bit of a way where you're talking about society as a whole, right? So when you look at Black Mirror, I want you to look at how you can make a psychological thriller out of this, right? The second thing is look at how they can manipulate and play into wiring how individuals think, do, and feel, right? And how it may link to someone's agenda, like a powerful person's agenda, right? To not get political, right? You can link this to the real world, right? Elon Musk bought Twitter, Twitter, has, banned or not banned, but has like, made new rules about free speech, and then he's trying to like alter what free speech means, right? So you can use that to inspire you. So if anything, Black Mirror is a great text to talk about, not only to talk about the real world, but talk about to be inspired by real world events, So that Elon Musk thing was one of my students got inspired by. How does a billionaire control the thought of individuals, and how does it and basically that kind of idea was done through play, right? It's the way that the billionaire has changed the way the kids play. That means that it changes the way that the kids think, right? So very crucial that we look at Black Mirror. Here's some key episodes to look at. So season 4, episode 1, and this will be on the website, so you can take a look and see which episodes. So yeah, cool. Any questions? No? Like I said, DM us if you've got a question and put in the chat if you have one as well. All right, over to Kathy.
Okay, so preparing your draft. So how do you actually write your story? Okay, so after you've taken inspiration from the mentor text, you need to define your purpose of the story. And I'm going to emphasize this again because it's really important that you have a purpose because there's no point in writing a story without a purpose. Assessors are looking for the overall purpose of your piece, and if you don't have one, then it's kind of like useless in you even writing the story. Um, so like David said, I actually took inspiration from growing up Asian in Australian. Wait, wait, can you go back to slides? I actually took inspiration from growing up Asian in Australia, the mental text that David recommended to me. And my story was about growing up Vietnamese in Australia. And I emphasized how one could neglect their culture without even realizing it when they are surrounded by like Australian culture. Um, and my story also expressed two frameworks, country and personal journey. And my purpose was to educate readers on the detrimental impacts on one's culture and identity of growing up and not maintaining your heritage. So yeah, purpose, step one. Step two, create a story mountain plan. Come up with your plot and your ending and how the ending is impactful to the reader. So we're just gonna go through my story plan that I actually wrote like for the exam. So in the opening, I just wrote about like going to Viet school. This was my opening. I always dreaded 10 o'clock on Saturday mornings. 10 o'clock meant the end of ABC TV. 10 o'clock meant dad's bellowing voice. 10 o'clock meant Vietnamese school. So you can see the use of repetition and how it creates an enticing hook. So that's like the features including you could include. The build up, I started talking about how much I hated Viet school and how I would disregard Viet classes. So I wrote, I was always seated at the back of the class with either my head on the desk or my eyes wandering to the big window on my left, observing the gum trees swaying in the wind and thinking about what mum packed me for lunch. I couldn't understand why I had to learn Vietnamese when everyone around us seemed to speak, think, and do in English. Why did I have to waste my time? I thought, and why did Dad waste all that money sending us to VA school? Again, the use of repetition, why, and imagery when I said observing the gum tree swaying in the wind. Again, the features of a text. And then the climax was when I wasn't able to understand my aunties and uncles when they were talking to me in Vietnamese. And that was a moment when I realized like how much I've actually let go of my Viet background. So this paragraph, every time I look in the mirror, a Vietnamese face looks back at me. The skin is tanned from the Australian sun, but the long black hair and monolid eyes come from Vietnam. When I open my mouth, I wish Vietnamese words would just flow into a coherent sentence, but they don't. When I write, I wish the symbols were in the correct places on the letters, but they're not. I wish that I could feel more authentic in everything I do. Again, the repetition, um, and yeah, it just creates a more like impactful and more emotional effect on the reader. And like the climax, you want it to be very dramatic and like the turning point kind of. Resolution was me attempting to relearn Viet. So now at 10 o'clock on a Saturday morning, I'm drowned in exercise books, sheets with Vietnamese words covering every inch of my desk, furiously writing with the whilst the blue ink smudges my hand. You can see the 10 o'clock on a Saturday morning how I returned back to the point that I had in my introduction. And like that kind of cycling effect is what assessors kind of like, and it makes your story more engaging and more interesting, like how everything connects at the end. And then the fiercely writing whilst the blue ink smudges my hand was again the imagery, the descriptive language that you should include in your creative.
Just a point. You don't need complex imagery. Like you
Mm,
don't need to be this genius author like J.K. Rowling to talk about to do imagery in a very in execute in a good way, right? You can do it as simple as bleeding as much as my hand. Like that incorporation of imagery is not complex. It's very simple. So really think about how do I approach it in a simple way because simple essays, simple creatives yield the best marks.
mm. And then the ending, telling dad a new Viet phrase I learned. So I wrote, I make sure to ask dad every time he's reading the newspaper if he found a new discount in a store advertised on that paper. Dad will move his glasses slightly up his nose, positioning his eyes within the frame and answer me, jumping from Vietnamese to English. I nod and reply in the same pidgin Vietlish language. Maybe tell him a couple Viet phrases I've learned today. I'm not interested in what discount there is. I just want to connect with my father. So you see the last sentence, I just want to connect with my father. It's impactful, it's emotional. You want to leave the reader with that like impact. And maybe tell them a couple of Viet phrases of today, kind of humor, adding like some exciting features to the story.
I think just on that last bit too, that I just want to connect with my father. That's what the assessor's going to take away, right? That's
Mm,
what the assessor is going to remember from your piece, and it's a very point thing. It goes from something that's very trivial, something that like hating going to Vietnamese school, to a kind of a really sad realization that you just wanna have fun and spend time with your dad. So I think it's very poignant that you leave off your ending that is at a sad realization.
yeah. Step three, after you've done your plan, create the enticing hook. This was mine. Step four, write your story according to the mountain plan. And then step five, include an emotional ending. So like I said, it is about connecting with my father and hence my heritage and culture through which he represents. So you want to leave them with the moral of the story and the key takeaway, which mine was don't neglect your culture as it can lead to family bonds being broken and a loss of identity, essentially. And yeah, any questions?
Yeah, I think following these steps is the closest thing that you have to a template. What's step
Hmm.
four? Let me go back to step two. So write your story following the master plan. Basically, those 5 steps in your master plan, which will be, which if I can pull that up for you right now. Sec. Oh no, I went too far. Let me find it now. There we go. So the opening, build up, climax, resolution, ending, right? You need to follow all those steps because those are the beats of the story, you know? And yeah, so for giving more an emotional view, would you normally write this in climax, resolution, or the ending? Um, well, Kathy wrote it in the ending.
Yeah,
I reckon it's
I
best to
reckon
write it in the ending. Yes,
um
Kath?
I reckon like in my climax as well when I said like I wish this, I wish that, it was also impactful. So I reckon try to include emotional aspects in all part of your story, like in the dramatic parts. So like the climax and the ending, if possible.
What's a good word range to stay in for the piece? It would be 800 to 1,000 words. Which may sound a lot, but it is very doable. When we look at your exam, if I quickly like break down the exam for you here, your exam is uh section A, section B, and C. So that's your text response, that's your creative, and that's your analyzing argument, right? You don't have, and you got 3 hours, right? You don't have to spend 1 hour on each exam, sorry, each section, right? What I recommend students to do is I recommend start with C and spend around 1 hour here, right? And then your creative, then you need to go to your creative, and I think you can. This is easily done in 30 minutes. I think that's what you did, Kathy, right? You did it in
Yeah,
like around 30 minutes, yeah.
yeah,
And then you leave the most time for your text response, which is 1 hour, an hour and a half. So 30 minutes doesn't sound like a lot of time, but remember, what you're doing is you're remembering your base piece. You need to be so familiar with the base piece that you know it inside and out that you can spit it out on a piece of paper in 30 minutes. However, you can't just spit it out on a piece of paper. You need to consider how you're going to mold your piece around around the stimuli, around the title. So 30 minutes, I reckon,
yeah,
is ample time to do that. If anything, start to plan with your reading time. Use your
yeah,
reading time to plan out how do I take this piece and connect it to this stimuli. If but yeah, that's my recommendation how you should approach the exam on the 3 hours. So yeah, cool, cool, cool. Any other questions before we move on? No? Oh, what's the stimulus for your piece on the exam? Uh, which did you choose, Kathy?
What'd you say? What was the stimulus?
Yes.
So I did personal journey. Um, what was the exam last year?
Let me pull up the exam for you guys last year. Give
Yeah.
me a second. All right, here we go. Do you guys see my screen? No. Do you guys now see my screen? Yep. So Kathy, which one did you pick out of all these?
Um, I think I picked, but it's no use going back to yesterday because I was a different person then.
So you can
Yeah,
already see how that's already connected to her piece, right? Her
yeah,
piece is talking about, the person yesterday was someone that didn't like Viet school, and the person today was someone that wished that had a regret about
yeah,
not going to Vietnamese school.
yeah.
So
But it was
yeah,
like I think I read like there's no point like regretting my past decisions. All I have like I can like determine what I can do next. So that was relearning Viet.
perfect.
So there's no use in like going on about like regretting or not learning Viet, but it's important about like thinking about what you can do now in the present moment.
Cool.
Do
Any
you
other questions?
see your full creative piece later? Yeah, I think we're gonna upload it on the website.
Yeah, we'll upload on our website in our resources tab, and then we can go from there. and you can take a look at her base piece. So yeah, cool. Any other questions before we move on? No? Cool. As always, if you end up having any questions, our emails are at the end of the presentation, so you can take note of our emails and you can give us ask us a question. They'll give you a reply. So yeah, cool, cool, cool. Let's move on to the dreaded section of the exam, which is argument analysis. Now, argument analysis is a difficult essay to master, right? And what really everyone doesn't understand or doesn't realize is we have to go back to the fundamental question of what is an argument analysis about? If you guys don't mind, does anyone know the answer? No? Okay. So what the argument analysis is about is not about the article. It's not about the author. It's about the audience's psychology, right? The audience's psychology. So it's about how the words and literary techniques impact the way the audiences. That is a grammatically wrong question. Anyways, it impacts the way that someone perceives something, right? The purpose of you need to find again, like a creative, but not like a creative. The argument analysis, you need to find the author's purpose. Is the author's purpose trying to educate, trying to empower, right? And how does that alter the audience psychology? I think we can all agree that most students find this the hardest essay to write in the exam and in the SAT because it's not a natural thing to write about, It's not natural to write about how would this person think and how would that person think, right? But we have to go back to the question I always get is what is analysis? And that question will be answered, and how do I analyze? What should I look for in an article? All that will be answered in the the upcoming slides. It's okay that you don't know where to start because this is again, this is a essay format that is not familiar to you guys, and I would kind of concede that your teachers probably haven't done a good job of it, of teaching you this. So let's go through some common mistakes. The first common mistake is failing to analyze towards the audience, towards an intended target audience, right? A lot of people analyze but don't analyze towards an audience. This is a key mistake because when we don't analyze towards an audience, we fail to gauge what they're thinking, what they're feeling, what would they do. The second is issues with tonal identification, right? Tone is so important because it really goes to the core question of how did the author approach their article, right? And it's important because it kind of lends into its purpose, right? There's another thing where when tone shifts, right? When tone shifts, the purpose also shifts, right? So we'll take a look into that as well. There has also a lot of people lack argument organization, and we'll go through that as well, but also misunderstand essay structure. And we'll go through what VCAR would love to see you write in an essay. And the last thing is the over reliance on identification rather than explain the effect of the language, linguistic, visual technique. I think a lot of people, I'm guilty of it as well, always says, oh, the author uses a rhetorical question, moves on. The author uses an anecdote. Yeah. We can't just identify, we have to also analyze. So yeah, so in the 2021 VCAR exam report, they have emphasized this part, right? It's only the first step, right? Only the first step. So it's very important that we don't just go on the first step, that we go step 2, step 3, step 4 as well. Cool? So today we'll go through it about audience, essay structure, and how to develop a 10 out of 10 analysis. First is identifying and understanding audiences. It is so important that you identify an accurate audience, right? Identify a wrong audience, if your essay falls apart because then it's not what the author intended, right? So it goes back to the question of what is an argument analysis about? And it's about the audience's psychology, right? What do I mean by the audience psychology? Now, the psychology of us, we're students, we're all from we're Gen Z, right? So the way we think, the way we do, and the way we feel is different from a parent. It's different from a retiree. It's different from a teacher. It's different from, you know, someone that grew up in a wealthy environment than someone grew up in in a more lower socioeconomic environment. So the psychology of each and every person is different. So we have to really recognize that, right? So yeah, so choosing the wrong audience can severely impact the mark you'll receive. But how do I accurately identify the right audience or an accurate audience, right? Number one is not good enough to identify the audience as the reader. If you refer to everyone as the reader is positioned to agree, blah, 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 right? It's not good enough because what I'm going to come in and say is who, who, right? Which type of people or which group of people are most likely to position themselves to agree with the author's viewpoint, right? It's about the most likely individuals. So when you do this, I want you to ban the word reader. Yeah. So so we need to link the audiences to a couple of ideas. The first is demographics. We'll go through psychographics, their occupation and position, and the community. So demographics refers to the factual features of the target audience, right? So for example, your age, your gender, your the social class that you grew up in, where you're from, the actual facts about your being, right? This is important because your audience can be people that are from Gen Z, people that are baby boomers, right? Because the way, like I said before, the way that a person of Gen Z age is going to think way differently than a baby boomer, right? Or than a millennial, because we grew up with different things. We grew up with iPhones, they grew up with, I don't know, the war, right? So it's very different how, we have interpreted the world, right? So very important that we realize that different audiences have different psychologies. The second, psychographics. Now, psychographics is actually a marketing or a PR concept, but it's a great concept to talk about because we don't have to just rely on, someone's age, their class, their what they are about. They can be people of a certain something that's arbitrary. So, for example, if their piece is about how Kendrick Lamar is a way better rapper than Drake, then of course the audience is going to be Kendrick Lamar fans, right? If it's about how I don't know, LeBron should retire, then it's towards Laker fans or even NBA fans. So it's very important that we can not only look at demographics, but we can look at psychographics. A more detailed way of going about it is combining the two, right? Who are the most likely people to be a Kendrick Lamar fan? People that are millennials or Gen Z, right? So you can say Kendrick fans that are Gen Z and millennials. That's a more specific audience than a Kendrick Lamar fan because is a bit arbitrary. So yeah, so very important that we go through psychographics, the kind of abstract features, right, of people as well. The second is you can link it to an occupation or position. So, for example, if a piece is about, how we should ensure that, climate change needs to be addressed properly so that our kids have a what's it called, a planet to live on, right? It's probably towards parents, So those are actual real people, real people that have real titles or jobs, yeah. The government is one of these as well, right? It could be towards teachers, it could be towards retail workers, it could be towards fast food workers, it could be towards factory workers, blue collar workers, anyone, right? So occupation and position is another good thing to look at as well. The last one's community. Now, this one's the easiest one, but it's easy, yet if you say members of the community, I'm gonna be like, what, who, right? It's members of a community that are catered towards a specific outlet, if that makes sense, right? So, for example, if your piece is about how a store needs to go cashless because Australians are embracing an economy where we pay by card, then it's more towards a customer at a certain store, right? Or Coles customers or Woolies customers, right? or if it's a radio station that is having a little podcast about, who I don't know, about the next AFL draft pick, right? Or AFL in general is talking about listeners to a particular radio station. So members of the community is the easiest audience, but it's also the most vague one. So if I was you, I'd probably stay away from the community one, but you can still sometimes use it. Okay. But the ones that I really am keen on is the demographics and psychographics. That really gets into the crux of the audience psychology. So yeah, so your every time you invite the audience, you need to label it as well. So parents or spy primary. So this is basically linking, if we go back to the other table, we're linking community and occupation together, right? Parents, occupation or position or life position at a community, spy primary community, may elicit feelings of urgency by right? Always, always, always label your audience because um, when you label your audience, I know that you're analyzing towards an audience because sometimes, right, your piece has more than one audience. And when your piece does, and you just refer to the audience as the audience or the reader, then I don't know who you're talking about because the psychology of a parent may be different to the psychology of a government official. Okay. Hence, the terms audience and reader are banned. If you ever write an essay for me and I see those words, I'm going to put a big fat X and say who. Okay. And yeah, like I said before, you can identify more than one target audience. Cool. Any questions about audiences so far? No? Easy. Let's move on to essay structure. Now, essay structure is very important into gauging on basically your whole approach to your argument analysis. There are two structures that you can use in your argument analysis. Yes, these slides are going to be shared on our website. So there are two analyzing argument structures that you can use. The first one is what I call the sequential order, meaning that you start with the intro as always, but your first body paragraph will talk about the beginning of the article, then you talk about the middle of the article, and then you talk about the ending of the article, right? And then you go to your conclusion. So this is a very logical way to structure your piece, because you don't need to spend more time determining what to include in your paragraphs. You see the first technique, you can talk about the first technique. You see the second technique, you talk about the second technique, right? It's a logical way, like I said, a logical way to order your techniques. However, it fails to highlight this very important dot point in your study design where it is talking about the development of argument. You don't, because articles are not, they're not linear. And what I mean by that is that each and every paragraph is about a different argument. And sometimes, paragraph one may be about argument one, paragraph two, argument two, paragraph three, argument three, but paragraph four may go back to argument two, paragraph five may go back to argument three, paragraph six may go back to argument two. Like it's never consistent. So you can't look at how a singular argument develops when you talk about all these ideas in isolation. You need to talk about in a way where you need to group them together. Another thing that I've noticed is that students spend too much time analyzing the first half of the article and not the second half of the article. And this is important because if you don't analyze the whole article, then really you lose half your marks because your second half, where is it? And like I said before, your ideas may seem disjointed. And really, most importantly, BCAR does not like this structure, right? I believe Kathy, you did the sequential order because your school told you to, didn't they?
Yeah, I did it because my school liked the sequential order. They really emphasized the beginning, middle, end. But David, when I was getting tutored, told me like to do the other structure, which was like argument segmentation. And I actually did argument segmentation on the exam, and then I got 18 out of 20. So that just proves that argument segmentation works
Yeah,
better.
so argument segmentation is about how do I find the three main arguments of the article and break them down um, into three body paragraphs. So in body paragraph one, you talk about one argument, the second argument in the second body paragraph, and the third argument in the third body paragraph, right? One thing you never do, you never talk about tone in a separate paragraph. You never talk about images as a separate paragraph. Why? Because images is a technique. Images are not a special thing. They are a technique, okay? they're a technique that is a part of how a author formulates their argument and how it can link to an argument. So we take a look. You may say, then how do I know which paragraph is which argument? I really encourage you to number your paragraph. So this is one of the paragraphs that one of my students have done, and what they have done was number each paragraph. So one, two, two, and they see that that last paragraph on the first page has two arguments in it, right? And goes back to number one, and goes back to number one, and goes back to number three. Okay, so it's very important. And then you can see on the image next to the guy raising his fist, the student include two arguments that it can link to. So images are supposed to be talked about and discussed on the level of an argument, not the level of an own individual paragraph. So what's some pros and cons to this, right? Some cons is that you need to spend more time on planning. Okay, you need to spend more time on planning to find the three arguments and then label which paragraph is which argument. And unfortunately, like I said before, they're jumbled. All the arguments are jumbled. So you have a job to find them. That's an extra job. However, doing this structure is very rewarding because it demonstrates how an argument is developed, right? It demonstrates how, you go from the audience goes from somewhat not convinced to very convinced at the end, right? So really looking at how the argument develops over time, that has an overall effect on the audience psychology. The second is the ideas are cohesive now. Your ideas and your body paragraphs are now separated into ideas. Okay. And yeah, VCAT loves this structure. So this is the structure that I got my perfect score on this exam, right? And this structure got Kathy her 18 out of 20. This structure got my 20 out of 20. Okay. So don't look down on it, right? If your school doesn't like it, then do a bit of both, right? But make sure that you do this on the exam. It's a must on the exam. So yeah, cool. Okay. Just before I continue, are there any questions? All right, cool. Let's go through some introduction writing, yeah? Very quickly, introductions are the most, like, you screw an introduction up, you lose marks. You do an introduction well, you don't gain marks, right? Where are the marks in your exam, or sorry, in your SAC, in the analyzing argument? It is on your body paragraphs, or it is in your body paragraphs, right? So let's quickly go through this. Back hat, right? So it's about background information. B, context of the article, what made the article want to write the article. And in that little box, there's an example. With the Australian economy increasingly relying on cashless payments, many small businesses have pondered about transitioning to a cashless-free monetary system. Second is about article details. It's very important that when your author has a title, for example, if your author's a doctor, mention they are a doctor. If your author's a lawyer, mention they are a lawyer. If they're a parent, mention they're a parent, yeah? So really look at the title, right? Look at the format as well, and look at the publisher, headline, date. The second is contention. Now, this is the most important thing about the contention, is that contentions cannot be, David contends that climate change is bad. Yes, yeah, maybe that's the contention, but you need to get a little bit more specific, okay? So contention is a mathematical equation, right? So this is the formula. It's the motivation behind the author and the change the author wants to see that equates to your contention. So the contention example I have here is a stair contends to produce a better customer experience. The store is compelled to transition to a cashless payment system. Cool. Audiences, we went through tone. Tone is very important because tone's really like the unsung killer of everyone's essay. You don't talk about tone, you really kill off your potential to get high marks. How do I familiarize yourself with tone? Is you use a tone bank, okay? Right? Use a tone bank and always look at that tone bank every time you write an essay. I would never write an essay without this tone bank. Why? Because you need to expand the vocabulary of tones and your familiarity of tones as well. Okay. However, I want to let you know a secret, yeah? Most articles use a didactic tone. What does didactic mean? Right? Didactic means to teach someone something that is not in a condescending way. So, for example, if you have a view that Australia should always use cash because cash is a reliable form of paying for items, yeah, then the didactic tone would say, yeah, I realize that, I recognize that. I recognize that cash is a good way to pay for items. However, there's a more safe way to pay for items, which is by card, right? So it's basically acknowledging the other side without being condescending, without being tormenting towards them, right? So you'll always see a didactic tone in most articles, not in every article, but in most articles, right? And then we go to purpose. Notice how in my little example of an introduction down there, it has all the items there. So audience, tone, and purpose. Utilizing a prideful and didactic approach, Astaire targets a local community to educate about the benefits of using a digital payment system. Very important that we tackle all three at once. It's an efficient way. This is a introduction template, right? You can use this. This is the template I personally use, right? Because I always use it. I memorize it. I can write this in less than 5 minutes, and that's the goal. Is that you write this in 5 minutes or less. Because, like I said, the marks are not in your introduction, right? Cool. Just really quickly, to look at your body paragraphs, you need to talk about 3 techniques in your body paragraph, right? Technique 1, 2, and 3, and have analysis for all 3 of those. You also need a concluding sentence. And the topic sentence is about the ideas and the argument. And this doesn't necessarily translate to, just one line. For example, analysis 1 doesn't mean one sentence of analysis. What it actually means is that for every one sentence of retelling, you need 3 sentences of analysis. So this is your ratio. You need 1 to 3, right? Why? Because what is your text or what is your essay? Your essay is an an analyzing argument. The purpose is to analyze, right? Not to retell. So you need to make sure that you inject your whole essay with a lot of analysis to the point where people, like the teachers, don't think you're summarizing. Cool. How do I kill an analysis? And it really goes back to the question that I've been always asking that really contextualizes the purpose of the masterclass is what is an argument analysis about? By now, you guys should know it's about the audience's psychology, right? So how do we gauge the audience's psychology? Now, there's 3 components to your analysis. The first is feel. This is the emotions that an audience member would feel, and this is linked to the heart. Yeah. So you're asking basically, how does the author position the audience to feel? Always linked to emotion. The key mistake that people make about feel is they don't link it to emotion. So people, like, I've seen this one a lot where people say, I feel a sense of respect. You can't feel that because respect is not an emotion. You actually think that. You think that, right? You think that you're respected. You don't feel that you're respected, if that makes sense. So emotions are like happy, sad, angry, frustrated, right? Belittled, tormented, traumatized, right? So really, really look at the emotions or the heart, right? You refer to the heart, okay? So that's the first component of your analysis. The next is think. This is the logic, right? The logic that people undertake in order to come to a conclusion where they agree with the actual author. So this goes to the head, right? And the question that we ask is, what is the belief the author wants to implant in the audience? So what's the difference between feel and think? One's about logic, and one's about thought. The other's about emotions and feeling, right? So, for example, a belief can be, if we talk about climate change, yeah, you can feel frustrated that the government's not doing enough about climate change. But the belief that you have is that the government is not doing enough about climate change. Do you get what I mean? One's about the actual thought, the other is your feeling towards that thought, right? So very, 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 very important that you know the difference. And the last one is do. Do is to the action. yeah, or what I call the body, yeah. It is what physical action is compelled by the author. So when we talk about do, is more about, if we're feeling frustrated about how the government's not doing enough to address climate change, and we're thinking that the government is incompetent and they can't address climate change, what we'll do is that we'll vote them out. Okay. So do you see how we develop a very cohesive analysis that is a what I call like to call a chain analysis, where we talk about, we go look at the dimension of the emotions, we go look at the logical dimension, and the action dimension. Okay. So it's very important that we take a look at all these dimensions. You always have to talk about all three. You can't talk about one, you can't talk about two, you need to talk about all three. This is why your ratio is 1 to 3. Your ratio is 1 to 3 because those three sentences, one sentence is on think, one sentence is on do, and the third sentence is on feel. Now, you don't have to do this in order. You can do first, think second, feel last, or in any order, right? But very, very important that you do something like this, right? So 1, 2, 3, okay? The thing with this analysis is it takes a while to develop a good understanding or a good muscle to invoke feel, think, do. It does take a while. It took me a year, right, to master feel, think, do. So don't be afraid that it takes you're not too you're not too familiarized with this, right? Feel, think, do is is a new concept, right? It's a concept that is very different to what your teachers have been saying, which is what I think what, how, why. Yeah. I never did what, how, why. I always, always, always did feel, think, do, right? Even how I said that you need to find that compromise between your teacher and and Vika. This is the one compromise I don't compromise. Yeah, this is the one thing I don't compromise. Is I always do feel, think, do every essay, including the SAC, right? It goes to the heart of the question. How does the audience feel, think, and do? And it goes to answer the question of what is the audience psychology? What is their interpretation of the words being used by the author, the techniques being used by the author in order to gauge what the audience effect is. Okay. So it's very important that we do full think do every single time, right? It looks tiring, it sounds tiring, okay? But trust me, this is the secret sauce that gave me the 20 out of 20. This is what gave Kathy her 18 out of 20. Okay. So this is this works. Vika loves this. Okay. So when your teachers tell you to do what, how, why, I will protest against them and say you have to do feel, think, do. Okay, or emotion, logic, and action, or heart, head, body. Okay. Any questions about feel, think, do? No. Cool. Easy. Just some things that we'll go through before we end off is some features of good writing. The best essays use simple language, and they make it easier to read and understand. Is there an example where we can see on how to do this effectively? Again, we'll post an example on our website as well on how we do this effectively. In fact, you know what? I'll kind of show you one right now. Give me a second. Let me get one up that I've done. Give me 2 seconds. Okay, cool. Let me quickly paste that in chat for you guys to see an example. This is an example that I've done for my students. It says Howard is in chat. So if you guys refer to the chat and not to my screen, take a look. Howard shifts from a mocking approach to a disappointing one, underscoring his wrongful hope in the government to not contribute to the climate crisis. Now that's a technique sentence, right? So we go back to the structure of if we go back to the structure of the body paragraph, that's a technique sentence, okay? The next sentence is feel. Policies may feel shameful as they fell short of an electoral promise of combating the climate crisis, whereby their integrity by young constituents are being challenged, right? So we link to emotion. We link to the emotion of shameful. Key word here is actually may. You can't be conclusive in your writing. You have to say the potentiality of it, or it may do this or it may do that. So you can't just say, yes, it will, policymakers will feel shameful. You need to say they may feel shameful. Hence, policymakers may shoulder the responsibility for burdening the future of young Australian young people as they ask themselves why they are not being able to meet the challenge of climate. Again, so it's the thinking of they have a responsibility. They're thinking that they are the ones responsible for killing the environment, right? Because they're not enacting good climate policy. And then the last one, do. Therefore, policymakers are inclined to advocate for a stronger stance on climate to their supervisors who may be in a position of power to enact effective change, like the Prime Minister. So you talk about how policymakers are now going to do something, right? They may talk to their colleagues about let's make a stronger climate policy. They may talk to their boss, who may be the Prime Minister, right? Because this is the government we're talking about. Yeah, that we need to have effective climate policy. Does that make sense, guys? Cool. We'll post a more fully fledged essay onto the website as well. If you guys would like, I'll give you the website now. It's not up yet, but it will be here on our website. That's the link. Cool, cool, cool. Okay, we'll quickly go through features of good writing, and then we'll wrap it up. So the first feature or the first kind of principle is you want to keep it simple. Yeah. Like I said before, simple essays gets the highest marks. Make it complicated. Have you ever read a sentence that you read and you're like, holy crap, what does that even say? Right? Holy crap. I just don't know what I've read. Yeah. Do not include those type of sentences in your paragraph. Second sentence or second feature, sorry, is about one sentence has to have one meaning, not two meanings, not three meanings, one meaning. Okay. Never more than one meaning. I would sometimes let you slide with two, but a good habit is to do one meaning, one sentence. Okay. The third is this is the most important thing is that you need to edit as you go. Okay. You can't just you can't just leave the editing at the end because personally, if I leave the editing at the end, right? If I leave it all the way to the end, I'm gonna be not bothered to actually go through my work and edit my work because I'm gonna close the sack up and I'm gonna sleep or submit my sack and get the hell out of there because I don't want to look at my essay. So you edit as you go. What do I mean by that? You don't edit every sentence. Sorry, you don't edit after every sentence. You edit after every section. So if you just completed your analysis, look and go back through your analysis, then move on to your second bit of analysis. Okay. You need to be as specific as possible. Where it's like impacts, I'm going to ask what impacts. Where it's like this, I'm going to ask what's this. So you have to stop yourself from using words that assessors will question, right? If they're going to question what is this, because you use the word this, then you kind of lose the meaning of the sentence, okay? So very important that you be as specific as possible. Oh, there was supposed to be an example. And there was not an example. And the last thing is I get the question of how do I expand my vocabulary? You don't need to know complex words. I think complex words, people think, I need to get a 40 in English, I need to use complex words. No, I was not a person that used complex words. Kathy, I didn't tell her to use complex words. I didn't tell her to use complicated words, right? Complex words do not show off good phrasing. If you don't know how to use a complex word, you then don't use it, right? Use it properly, then yes, of course, great, go ahead, use it, right? But you use it improperly, it really sticks out like a sore thumb. Sore thumb. So good writing means that you show good restraint, okay? Good restraint on making sure your sentences are one sentence, one meaning. Good restraint that your words are never too overly complicated or too big of words, So don't feel simple writing, okay? Simple writing is good writing. Okay. The one thing I always do when I write essays, no matter the section I am doing, if I'm doing the analytical text response, if I'm doing the analyzing argument or the creative, I always have this next to me. I always have my word bank next to me. I was a classic user of the word suggest. I love the word suggest. So every time I had the opportunity, I used the word suggest. And that's a bad thing because then every point of my essay, there was the word suggest. So what I did was when I use one word like suggest, I'll cross it out and then I need to use a different word. So at least two. I use the word at least two, cross it out, I need to use a different word, clarifies, conveys, right? So every verb in my essay was a new verb. Okay, this expanded my vocabulary. So this is what you when you write your essay, this is what it should look like. You have your tone bank next to you and you have your word bank next to you, right? And then you write your essay. Why? Because you want to make sure that these two are next to you all the time, right? I can give you an example. Give me a second of a complex sentence. Yes, I'll give you an example of a complex sentence in a second. I'll just need to look for one. Just on this note though, uh, having the two banks next to you, right? Every time you write your essay, when you enter your SAC room, when you enter the exam room, it feels like that you have them next to you because they would be implanted in your head, right? They will be embedded in your head. So when you go and write your essay without these two, you're gonna be full of synonyms, you're gonna be full of tones, okay? Very important that you do this, okay? Kathy did an example bank, and Kathy succeeded with an example bank for her analytical text response, which was for "We have always lived in a castle." So it's very important that we
Yeah.
do this.
And also, I want to recommend that you build your word bank now and not last minute so that you're using it now so that by the end of the year, you'll like have all of it memorized basically.
Yeah.
Unlike me, I did it last minute.
Just before we wrap up, just I'll give you an example of a overly complex sentence. Uh, the characters in Sunset Boulevard are corrupted by their relentless delusions, which in like even the words I can't even pronounce. That's too much, right? That's way too much. So you've got to cut it down. I'll cut down the big words, and this has three meanings, so you need to have one meaning. So always cut down those words. So that's an example of a sentence that I'm not a fan of, that you need to cut it down. Okay. Just one last thing before we go. Give me a sec. Let me present. Just one last thing. Because you guys attended today's class, or today's masterclass, you guys are entitled to 2 weeks free of our free trial, right? Usually we offer a week free, but because you guys come, you guys will get 2 weeks free. Really good opportunity to use them in your holidays. Yeah. Um, what a Keda lesson is basically we look through this knowledge, the skills, and the mindset. Again, going back to that pillar of Keda, which is empathy, right? What you also receive is a 24/7 hotline. Kathy messages me all the time. So yeah, and a one-on-one feedback session, a Cato resource bank. So basically what that means is that you have access to what we have, right? We have built years and years and years of worth of resources. We will give them to you. Okay. So yeah, so it's very you guys would benefit a lot from a experience that is very, very worthwhile. So if you're interested, what I'll do is let me paste in a link, okay? If you copy that link into your browser, um, then you can sign up for the free trial. Let us know your availability. Let us know what school you go to, what text to study as well. Uh, and like we said before, the site will be made available on our website tomorrow. If you have any questions before, be sure to email us. So my one is David at kedaeducation.com. Kathy's is kathy.newen at kedaeducation.com. that 24/7 helpline. Look, we're always happy to help people. So if you want to ask questions, that is after 2 weeks free trial, then do it. Okay. What you can do is just give me an email. I'll always will respond. Okay. More than happy to help anyone. But
Yeah.
I really recommend doing the 2 weeks free trial because Kathy actually came to us through a masterclass, and she used her 2 week free trial and became a student, and she got a 43. So our process is work, right? Our what we do not only works, but we can help you get the score that you need. So um, if you can do that free trial, if you would like to do the free trial, be sure to complete that form. The next thing I would encourage everyone to do is if you guys can give us some feedback on this masterclass. We just have a link. If you would like to complete the feedback form, you can complete the feedback form, but make sure you yeah, be sure to use your 2 weeks free for your holidays because you get a head start like, with everyone else, and like yeah, you want to be a better place and be ahead of everyone. Um, I was to say we did bad on our first SAC, which was creative. Would it still be possible to come back and get a good study score? Perfect, great question. I myself did really crap on my first SAC, right? I got around a 60%, I believe, on my first SAC, right? Um, and then I consistently got higher grades, right? I think an 80 and a 90 as well. What this demonstrates, if we go back to the slide that we looked at before with my grades, yeah, you don't need to get a 90 to get an A plus, okay? Right? What you need to do is you can do I did a 77 and that gave me an 89 and that was an A plus. So what this means is that your exam brings you back, okay? Your exam brings you back from maybe somewhere where you're not doing too well to somewhere where okay, now I'm in a competing chance to be in the top 9% of the state. Okay. So my exam scaled up my marks by 12% here. Oh crap. I just lost my screen. Sorry. My exam gave me the 12%, right? It boosted my mark to 12%. And they're not afraid. They're very generous in the marks they scale you up by. You can't read that, right? So it's very important that you don't just you don't give up after your first sack. And I certainly didn't, right? You persist, you get higher grades, and you ace your exam, you will get that mark, that 40 that you need. Okay. Any other questions? Cool. You guys have our emails if you need it. You guys have our emails if you need if you have any questions to ask us. Be sure to use the 2 weeks free. It's so important because we're at a time where people are starting to write essays, and those essay structures are not clearly explained by their teachers. So very important that that you use the 2 weeks free. Okay. Any last words, Kathy, before we hop off?
No, thank you everyone for coming.
Yeah, and thank you. The 2 weeks free classes, there is dependent on someone just asked me if they're group classes or individual classes. Now it's just dependent on what you prefer. If you prefer individual, we'll sure to cater you to an individual class. However, it is also to the availability of the tutor. So if we're a bit tight on time, we might allocate you to a group class, but if we have a little bit more time, we'll be more than happy to do a one-on-one. So yeah, great question. Cool. Well, I don't want to keep you guys anymore. We went 9 minutes over time. So yeah, yes, you'll be able to download the slides. It'll be up available tomorrow on that resources thing. I'll give you guys an email about everything, all the links and everything you guys need to do. So yeah, perfect. Cool. Easy. No, thank you. Thank you for coming. And yeah, you guys have a good day as well. I think, yeah, like I said, use the 2 weeks free. And yeah, we'll see you guys later. Have a good one, guys.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. See you.
See you later.